Here we are again. Happy homework time. Lesson 30 homework. So we have division, yes. And notice we have today the magic number is 0. So we're simply dividing and checking with multiplication, but now we have some zeros to reckon with. So let's dive right in. And of course, I just want to state at the whoa, name and date. All right, I'll put my name, you put yours. My goodness, almost skipping that. Such an important step. And for today's date, I will write today. You write the actual date where and when you are in this world. So anyway, I'm working on the assumption that by lesson 30 of module 3, you have the basics of long division down. You know your multiplication facts, so that we can kind of move through the homework. If that's not the case, then talk with your teacher about what you need to review, get some extra help and such. So when we look at this, we cannot ask how many 5s in 4. Well, we could, but it'd be, well, none, and move on. So we're going to look at, we have 40 10s here instead of just looking at the 400. So how many 5s in 40? Well, again, knowing those multiplication facts, you know that there are 8 5s in 40 because 8 times 5 is 40. Subtracting out those 40 10s, we're left with 0 10s, but then we still have these 9 1s to divide. So we say, well, how many 5s in 9? Yes, of course, there is 1 because 1 times 5 is 5. And when we subtract, we're left with 4. And you see that's less than our divisor. You can't ever have a remainder that's equal to or greater than your divisor. Just means you didn't divide completely. So we have a remainder of 4. Now to use multiplication to check our division, we take our quotient, 81, multiply it by the divisor of 5, and, I'm not going to pretend anymore, after we add in that remainder of 4, we should end up with our dividend that we started with, the 409. And make sure you're actually doing this. I'll just say it once. Make sure you're actually doing the multiplication and addition. Don't just write what it's supposed to be, because then you're not really checking anything. You're doing that thing we call wasting your time. So 5 times 1 is 5, and 5 times 8, as we just said recently, is 440, so 405 there. Add in our remainder of 4, and we end up with, yes, 409, which is what we started with. Checks out. All right, so now let's try this one. We are asking 503 divided by 2. And this one's a little different in that here we said, okay, well, there aren't any 5s and 4s, so move on to the 40. But here, when we ask how many 2s in 5, yes, there are 2 2s in 5, right? Because 2 times 2 is 4. So we can divide those hundreds. That leaves us with 100. And now let's deal with these 10s. Just because it's 0, 0 is a number, y'all. So we have these 0 10s we need to divide as well. So we can think of this as 10 10s. Yes, 100, 10 10s. So how many 2s in 10? Well, there are 5 2s in 10 because 5 times 2 is, you got it, 10. Now, we're about to come up to something tricky, so stay with me here. We subtract, we get 0, no problem there. We still have 3 1s to divide. So how many 2s in 3? There's 1. Okay, so I guess maybe not that tricky, because 1 times 2 is 2. You subtract, you're left with 1, which is going to be a remainder. Just didn't want to mess up with that last division there. And so to check this out, we will take our 251 quotient, multiply it by our divisor of 2, and after we add in our remainder 1, we should get the dividend 503. Let's see if that happens. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 5 is 10. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. That's 502, which of course I can see without really having to do math. That plus 1 is 503, which checks out. Let's see what's next. I'll tell you what's next. More division. Divide like a pro. Here we go. We have 831, which we are dividing by 4. So let's do it. How many 4s in 8? There are 2, of course, because 2 times 4 is 8. And we're about to come up on something that's actually tricky. So we subtract, we're left with 0. So now watch this closely. So we have 0 hundreds, but we do still have 3 tens that we need to divvy up. We need to divide, right? Now, when we ask ourselves, here's an important question, y'all pay close attention. How many 4s in 3? So in other words, if I have 3 donuts, and yeah, they're 3 tens, so we can say 3 boxes of donuts. So if I have 3 donuts anyway, and 4 hungry people, and I want to share them out fairly, how many will they get each? 0. That's right, they will get 0. And 0, again, is a number. We cannot just pretend it means nothing. 0's a number in math. So when I say how many 4s in 3, and you say none, that's true, it's not wrong. Let's also think, at least, if not say, 0. How many 4s in 3? 0. And that's why we need to write 0 here in the tens place of our quotient. And it's the same as we normally do. How many 4s in 3? There are 0, because 0 times 4 is 0, which we subtract, and we still have those 3 tens. And we have 1 1 to divide as well. So again, to go back to our donuts analogy, I want to make sure I explain this correctly here so you really get this. We have 3 boxes of 10 donuts, 4 hungry people. Hey, I can't give you any boxes of 10 donuts because I have 3 boxes and 4 of you. So what we do then is we open up those 3 boxes, and then we have 30 donuts. Oh, and don't forget there's 1 donut in the bag, right? So that's where this 31 comes from. I can't hand out these 3 boxes of donuts because I have 4 people. So I need to open them up. I need to decompose the number, the tens, as ones. So I'm opening up the boxes of donuts, 31 ones. Now I can start handing out some donuts. So how many 4s in 31? You know your facts, right? Got it? All right, yes, there are 7 because 7 times 4 is 28. If we went another 4, that'd be 32. We don't have 32. So when we subtract, you don't have to do like the subtraction action here. You could just be like 29, 30, 31. Right? Or just look at it and say, well, it's 3. So we have 3 donuts left over. We have a remainder of 3, which is good. I just want to do that mental check. It's less than our divisor. So let's do the multiplication check as well here. If we take our quotient 207, multiply it by our divisor, once we add in our remainder, we should end up with our dividend here. So 4 times 7 is, 28. We just did that. And 4 times, now be careful, 4 times 0 is 0 plus 2. 0 plus 2 is 2. Good. 4 times 2 is 8. And of course, now we need to add in that remainder of 3. And I'll do it out long ways for you. 8 and 3 are 11. 2 and 1, 3, and 8. Okay, so 831. Checkaroo. Well, let's look at this one. Expect something similar, if not even trickier here, right? So we have 602, which we are dividing by 3. So watch how this one works. How many 3s in 6? All right, easy enough start. Well, there are 2 3s in 6 because 2 times 3 is 6. When we subtract, we're left with 0. Now, we have 0 hundreds. How many 10s do we have? We have 0. We cannot just say, oh, there's nothing there, move on. We deal with 0 like we do any other number. How many, here's a funny looking question, but it's a real question. How many 3s in 0? So I have 0 boxes of donuts, but I still have to say, hey, you're not getting any boxes of 10 donuts because I don't have any. I have 0 boxes of 10 donuts. So the 3 of you, you are getting 0 boxes of donuts. I can't just skip over that and pretend it doesn't exist. So how many 3s in 0? There are 0 because 0 times 3 is 0. You see how I ask those same questions and same responses as I would with any other number. Zero's a number. I subtract, yes, I get 0, but then I still have these 2 donuts to deal with. Now here we go again with something tricky. I have 2 donuts, right? It's 2 ones. I have 2 donuts, and I have 3 people. And they're saying, how many do we get each? I say, you get nothing. You get 0, because I have 2 donuts and 3 people. You get, write it down with me, you get 0 of these 2 donuts, because 0 times 3 is 0, so I'm left with these 2 donuts, which I can't share fairly because there are 3 of you. So that is a remainder of 2, and this is going to be an easy check. So you see how you have to deal with zeros, basically like you do any other number. That's sort of the guiding principle here to keep in mind. Check is simple. 200 times 3, well, you hardly even need to multiply to do that. You can just look at it, right, and say 3 times 2 times 100, 6 hundreds, right? Remember we did all that at the beginning of the year? So 600 plus our remainder of 2, of course, is 602, which checks out. I love doing this stuff. Woo! Yeah! Let's move on. And let's look at numbers 5 and 6. We see we're in 6. We're about to go out to 4 digits. Woo! All right. So let's try number 5 first. And we can see we have some zeros in play here, so we kind of just need to be, a little cautious with them. Make sure we do those correctly. So we're starting with 720, which we're dividing by 3. So how many 3s in 7? 2, because 2 times 3 is 6. When we subtract, we're left with 100, but we have these 2 tens to divide, so altogether it's 12 tens, right? So how many 3s in 12? There are 4, because 4 times 3 is, yes indeed, 12. When we subtract, we're left with 0. Now, remember, we're going to treat 0 like we do any other number. It's a number. So we have 0 ones that we need to divide. If you have 24 as your answer, that makes no sense, right? If you think about it, right? Okay, so we can't. So we have 0 ones we need to divide up. So these 3 people are sitting here saying, hey, you have 0 donuts. How many do we get each? I say, hey, there are 3 of you. I have 0 donuts. You get 0 donuts each. Because 0 times 3 is 0, and when I subtract, yes, I'm still left with no donuts, but I can't just leave that ones place. And that's what I've been telling you from the beginning with division. Make sure your place values are lined up, and you would see that you need to do something here in the ones place. Our check is going to be pretty easy because we have no remainder to add in. So just 240 times 3. And by the way, if you're familiar with hours in a day, 1 day's 24, 2 days 48, 72 hours. You see how there's a connection here? 3 days is 72 hours. You see that? Okay. 3 times 0 is 0. 3 times 4, 12. 3 times 2 plus 1 is 7. 720, as we expected and suspected. Check-eroni. Now here we're dividing by 5, and the number ends in a 0, so we know what about remainderdom? Yes, that we will not have a remainder, because any number that ends in 0 or 5, any number, and I mean any number, that ends in 0 or 5 like this, whole number, is evenly divisible by 5. So no remainder coming up here. So how many 5s in 6? Yep, there's 1, because 1 times 5 is 5. When we subtract, we're left with 1,000, right? 1 in the thousands place. And now let's divide up these 2 hundreds. So now we have 12 hundreds. How many 5s in 12? Right, there are 2, because 2 times 5 is 10. Subtract, we're left with 2 hundreds. And next we can divide up these 5 tens. So we're looking at 25 tens. How many 5s in 25? That's right, you know that fact. There are 5, because 5 times 5 is 25. I'm going to say it again. Treat 0 like any other number in division. We subtract here, we get 0. but we still have 0 ones to divvy up. We need to divide the 0 in the ones place. So these 5 people are sitting here saying, hey, you have 0 donuts in your hand. How many do we get each? I know it's a stupid question. All right, but hey, they asked it. These 5 people say, you have 0 donuts. How many do we get each? I say, hey, you guys get, write it down with me, you get 0 donuts each because 0 times 5 is 0. And when I subtract the donuts I've handed out, 0, I still have 0. So there's no remainder as we predicted. If you did this the wrong way and got 125, just left off that ones place, first of all, you'd notice you got a gap-toothed quotient that's missing a place value, but also when you went to do the check for real, you would have realized you get 625 instead of 6,250. So let's do that check. We know we're right because we're awesome, but hey, even awesome people make mistakes, so it's good to keep tabs on ourselves with an honest check. 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12. And 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. 6,250. Check! Sorry, I got a little too excited there. Let's go look at the next 2, shall we? Yes, we shall. Well, look at here. We're dividing by 5, ends in 0. We know we'll have no remainder, but we can see there's some 0 action going on here that we will have to be wary of. So we have 2,060, which we are dividing by 5. Starting off, we can say, okay, we can't ask how many 5s in 2, so we just look at 20. How many 5s in 20? 20 hundreds. How many 5s in 20? You got it. There's 4 5s in 20 because 4 times 5 is 20. When we subtract, we are left with 0. Now we look at the tens. We have 6 tens to divide. So how many 5s in 6? Good. There's 1 because 1 times 5 is 5. When we subtract, we're left with 1. And we have 0 ones, which we have to divide. We treat 0 like any other number. So how many 5s in 10? Well, there are 2, of course, because 2 times 5 is 10. Subtract, we're left with 0. As we predicted, we have no remainder. So we see here in this case, having zeros in the dividend doesn't mean we're going to have zeros in the quotient. All right, you see that there's kind of a difference there. All right, so let's take 412 to do our check. 412 times 5. So 5 times 2 is 10. And 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. 5 times 4, 20. So we end up with that same 2,060 we started with. Beauteous. Now when we look at this one, we're dividing by 2, and it's an odd number. So we know we're going to have a remainder. In fact, it's going to be a remainder of 1. In fact, couldn't we make the general statement, let's be like mathematicians here, that if you're dividing by 2 and you have a remainder, it's going to be a remainder of 1. Right? Because there's no other numbers in between 0 and 2. So if there's a remainder, it's going to be 1. Isn't that cool? That's part of the beauty of math here. 9,031 divided by 2. So how many 2's in 9? Yes, there are 4 2's in 9 because 4 times 2 is 8. When we subtract, we're left with 1,000. And now let's go to the next place, the hundreds. We have 0 hundreds. Treat it like any other number. So how many 2's in 10? Yippers, there are 5 because 5 times 2 is 10. Subtracting, we're left with 0 hundreds. So now we go to the next place, the tens place. We have 3 tens. How many 2's in 3? You got it. There's 1 because 1 times 2 is 2. Subtracting, we're left with 1 10. And lastly, let's divide the ones place. We have 1 1. So now we're looking at 11 ones. So how many 2's in 11? Yes, there are 5 because 5 times 2 is 10. Subtract, and you are left with that remainder of 1, which we predicted accurately. Well, let's do a check because, like all humans, we are fallible. We are prone to making mistakes, and we want to make sure we didn't here. So we will multiply quotient by divisor. We should get dividend after we add in our remainder. So 2 times 5 is 10. Yep. 2 times 1 is 2. Plus 1 is 3. 2 times 5 is 10 again. And then 2 times 4 is 8. Plus 1 is 9. Let's add in that remainder of 1, and we get 9,031, which checks out. We only have 2 left. Oh my goodness. Let me tell you how lucky you are. Back in my day, oh, never mind. But you got a nice, easy homework here. Let's finish it out. Alrighty then, let's finish things out with 9 and 10 here. So we're starting, no word problems. Sup at that. Alright, so let's start off with 6,218, which we are dividing by 4. Let's do it. How many 4s in 6? There is 1, because 1 times 4 is 4. When we subtract, we're left with 2 thousands, which we decompose with the 2 hundreds, so 22 hundreds. How many 4s in 22? There are 5 4s. Whoa, messy 5. 5 accident on the highway. Crash on Highway 5. 5 times 4 is 20. Subtract, we get 2, which we're going to decompose with this 110. So how many 4s in 21? Yes, again, there are 5. Now it's a little better, because 5 times 4 is still 20. We subtract, we're left with 1, and then we have 8 1s. So how many 4s in 18? Yes, there are 4, because 4 times 4 is 16, which when we subtract, we see will leave us with a remainder of 2. So to check this, we take our 1,554, and we're going to multiply that by our divisor of 4. We should get the quotient after we add in our remainder. Let's check it for real. So 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times 5, 20, plus 1 is 21. 4 times 5 is still 20, but this time plus 2 is 22. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 2 is 6. Now let's just add in our remainder of 2, and we can see, without really doing addition per se, 6,218 is what we started with, checkaroos. Okay, so now this is a nice one to wrap things up with. 8,000 divided by 4. So how many 4s in 8? There are 2, because 2 times 4 is 8. Now watch what happens here. This one is to demonstrate to you why. Okay, so we subtract to get 0. We can't just stop there and say, oh, well, those are all zeros. Because 2 times 4 is 8, not 8,000, right? So we're going to go through all these zeros here. We just treat them like they're numbers. Now we're going to say, okay, we have to divide up the 0 hundreds. How many 4s in 0? There are 0 4s in 0, because 0 times 4 is 0. Subtract, we get 0. Now we divide the 10s. There are 0 10s. How many 4s in 0? There are 0 4s in 0, because 0 times 4 is 0. Notice I'm going through all the same steps. It's just 0 is the number. Subtract, I get, yes again, 0. Now I can divide up the 1s. So I have 0 1s. How many 4s in 0? There are 0 4s in 0, because 0 times 4 is 0. When I subtract, I'm left with 0, so no remainder. And we can see just in a glance that this is going to check out, because we don't really have to multiply so much here. It's just use our mathematical intuition and knowledge, and to say that, okay, 2,000 times 4. Remember how we used to break these down with place value? 2 times 4 times 1,000, right? So 8,000s, 8,000. All right, so it checks. Beautiful. Check. Wow, you did it! homework time is over. So I'll see you again next time. It is homework time.